I have a question to ask, and it's kind of been something that's in the back of having been involved in lots of these discussions. I'd like to ask Sheikh and also ask you as well. Over time, as we've had this conversation and encouraged discussion, specific to Islam and to faith, it almost feels like the discussions become bigger than the original thing, and it feels almost like it's become more complicated than it seemed at the beginning. Certainly for me, because yes, I'm a transplant surgeon, but I'm a practicing Muslim, and as I went into it, I had to make serious thoughts myself. And I'm reasonably well read, but I struggle to understand and follow some of the fatwas and documents that are out there. And I think where we started is that preservation of life is paramount, and we seem to all agree. But we've carried on talking to points where we disagree, and now started to debate about what is death. And it just feels like, even though that's a huge thing, and it's an important thing, but really the purpose of it is it not better to go back to the kind of basics and back to the starting question?
Absolutely.
Yes, I agree.
I think you're right, and I think I tried to touch on this morning. But the fatwa actually does make it more complicated. And the only reason I'm even here to discuss this is because I feel passionately about exactly what you just said, is that we have made it more complicated. And if we'd stuck to that one sentence in the earlier fatwa, was that we leave this to the medical professionals, it would have meant we could then focus our energies on getting out there to talk to people about what really matters, rather than getting into the intricacies of the different kinds of definitions of death. And I totally agree with you. So.
Thank you very much for that. And I think the thing is that even though sometimes people feel as transplant professionals, or like, so for example, for me and Rosie, that we're coming along because we're advocating we should do lots of transplants, but we're not in any danger of losing work or any danger of not having enough work. But the bottom line of it is that we for a lot of people, the decisions for one person or their family about joining the organs on the register, or one story of somebody who's on the transplant waiting list. For us, it's hundreds of thousands of patients, and we're in that position where, does it improve life? Does it improve quantity and quality of life? There's absolutely no doubt. So for us, it's our responsibility to come and say, if you have some doubt, does transplantation or does coming forward as an organ donor improve somebody's life or give somebody life? Well, there's no doubt about that. So I think that's something that's quite important, that it feels like that message is there. But generally for doctors as a whole, in the practice of healthcare, my job is to protect, preserve life, first do no harm. These are the principles, and I don't find any conflict in my faith. In fact, I find it share the same things. So I sometimes feel a bit confused as to why the conversation has become so difficult with inside of faith, when actually I felt that it actually helps to complement aspects of my own practice.
So I generally like to take a lot of time to think and process the question, and I haven't got that luxury here. But I would say that the reason it has become complicated is because in reality these questions do have a philosophical dimension, and there is uncertainty. To be pragmatic, we arrive at definitions and understandings so that we can function in the world. So I guess that is probably the challenge here for those who are falling deeper and deeper into disagreement is, okay, at what point should we just agree? Like, where should we draw the line so that we can then move on to the next stage of the discussion? But, I personally wouldn't dismiss these questions entirely. I think there is a place for them to be discussed. The question is, who should be discussing them, and how far should they reach out into whichever space we're considering? And I am hopeful, I think, that we will get past this point. If not, we'll have 3D printed kidneys that we can all transplant.
Couple questions there. I want to open to the floor in just a second. Is there a difference in the standard of meetings of the digital research purposes? I want to pick an open position. It's not like I said, but just like improvement. So research and like improvement, not like I said.
my understanding that there is a difference, but it's again one of these subtle things that I think we need to have a lot more information. That the principles that I said was talking about life saving. Now research isn't always clearly life saving, but clearly a lot of research ultimately will save lives. So therefore there are two separate questions there. When I'm talking about, I have no questions at all about the validity and the importance of transplantation. That's without doubt in my mind because of the question of saving lives. When it comes to research, that isn't so automatic. It now, for me, means I need to find out more about what is this research and what is the ultimate outcome of this research. And if I'm then convinced, or a scholar's convinced, that this is the right process, in effect that's what we do anyway. We have ethical committees to look at research for that particular reason. So there are simple questions, and I think it's not so simple.
Can I quickly add to that? This is just to demonstrate that although it may not be clear within the Islamic perspective how we should approach donating organs for research, even in the broader discussion in the mainstream secular discourse, it's also not so clear. So the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, where I work, have produced a very lengthy report on human bodies, and it's talking about donating bodies or parts of bodies for research. And it's probably a 200-page report that sets out all of the ethical issues. So I think sometimes there is a temptation to separate out the issue and just look at it from a very particular moral perspective, and if that's a religious perspective, we do that. But if we look a bit more broadly outside of the faith into mainstream society, some of those ethical concerns would still exist.
What about life improving? Is there any questions on the floor?
Question for Sheikh Abdulaziz mainly. Yes, question for Sheikh Abdulaziz mainly.
Yeah.
So in brain death, we know obviously the clinicians will do tests to see if there's actual brain death, and I'm assuming they mean, well, that includes that the body doesn't feel any pain, so the pain receptors are completely cut off. But there's a strong belief in the Muslim community that after death, that the body feels pain, and I think there's a fear amongst the relatives of the deceased that if the body then goes for transplantation, that person will feel pain. What's the origin of that belief, and is there any truth to it? And then, if there is, how can we as clinicians approach patients and deal with that particular concept?
The idea, it's difficult because it's a metaphysical and spiritual question, and I'm afraid I may have to go beyond what the medical understanding would be. There is an origin to this, but before talking about that, there's a very important verse in the Quran which says, they ask you about the spirit. Say that the spirit, the answer to this, say the spirit is God's domain, and you know little about it. So the whole idea, so that verse actually says, this is a different dimension. Therefore, the few indicators from the Islamic tradition, the Quran and the prophetic tradition, are not there as dictates or specifics. They're more general concepts and general guidance. And in the end, the Quran is described not as a medical book, but as a book of guidance. So to try and analyze these verses and statements in a medical way would actually limit the purpose of it. So I want to say that first, but there are origins in this, and one of them is a number of statements about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who said, when you walk towards the grave, that the person in the grave will hear your footsteps. There's another statement that when the person is in the grave, he will see to the garden, to the heaven, or to the hell to see where his place will be as part of his torment. Now these are not medical hadith, these are not things that we can extract medical science from. They're guidance about what your role is in life, and you should take guidance from them rather than take them literally in terms of how you define a particular legal matter. So there are origins, so the answer to the question is yes, they are valid because they are from a tradition. However, the way that you use them and interpret them have to be understood for a specific purpose. It's a book of guidance, not a book of medical ethics in all of those places.
Sheikh, can I just ask you for clarification on the same question? Because it's something commonly we get asked. There is a difference between physical human body pain and spiritual awareness of pain. There's a definite difference in that.
Yeah, absolutely, because what's being referred to, and the scholars have said, some of them have tried to describe pain as part of the nervous system, and that once you die, this happens. That really that misses the point of what's being said here. It's clear that what's being meant about when you're in your grave, you can see to the heaven. Obviously your sensory perceptions is greater, that's what the implication is. It's talking about basically, you live a good life and be fearful of that moment of death and the consequence of what follows after death. That's really what it's about. So the idea of it being more intense pain, spiritual pain, can best be understood perhaps through emotional understanding. How do you measure emotional pain? You can't. But anybody that has gone through real emotional trauma and have really felt an emotional pain will know that on many occasions they would rather hit round the head than feel that pain. Now you can't measure that in terms of science, but you know what I'm talking about. And that's what is meant by spiritual pain, or the spirit feeling it. You can't measure it, you can't analyse it, you can't transfer it from one person to another. It's just something that you know as being what your spirit is. Your spirit feels pain, your spirit feels joy. But it's not a technical thing. We all know what I'm talking about because you've all felt the emotional pain. You've all felt that thing inside you. And that's what I think is being described in God's place.
That's fantastic.
I'm a GP in Rochdale Borough, but I chair the GP Federation of the borough, and I serve Steve Taylor on the LCO board. So come April this year, we've got 84 million coming from the commissioners to our LCO board, from which public health and various community initiatives will be addressed. And considering central Rochdale, the Asian community is one of the highest users of secondary care services, that's going to be an area where we're going to be investing a lot more money than the rest of the borough. So all the communication stuff that you're talking about is the kind of stuff we will be doing to bring that community to adopt all the services that we're offering. So if we have a chat afterwards, that would be useful. The bit I was going to ask was, as a GP, when I go and certify someone deceased, in effect, we won't generally say they're dead. We say life is extinct. And we pronounce life extinct because they've got fixed pupils and no major pulse and no breath sound and such. And to me, that's a very physical way of identifying that there is no life left in that individual. The problem I have is that when we talk about death and we try and disassociate the soul from the physical body, we know, especially Muslims in the room, that as history's gone by and we've got more and more intelligent, we've reflected on the Quran and realised that everything's in there, we just didn't understand it because we're not clever enough. An example being the planets swing around the sun. And that's only a recent scientific invention, yet the Quran refers to the planet swimming around the sun. Should we really be using terms like life extinct rather than death when moving from one religion to another?
Questions?
Okay.
It's actually probably easier for us to answer the question. I'll give it to Shay because obviously I know him. But I think part of the problem is that that concept of life and death should be kept very separate. Death and its metaphysical and its theological and everything like that is something that actually nobody has really got a handle on, completely however you look at it. It's very important in what we do that we're very clear in the communication to the patient and the patient's relatives at a very difficult time. So I think everybody understands death and death, and they know it, and it's very difficult, but sometimes it's important not to skirt around that and then to confuse the issue with something else, because I think then it's open to interpretation. Death doesn't get misinterpreted, you know, and I think that to start to, certainly if somebody came to Sheikh and asked about, you know, like brainstem death and turning off a machine and all of the different things like that, he's better equipped to talk about those kind of things. But it's also important that we are communicating clearly. Brainstem death is death, it's death, certified death, and you know, a machine can be switched off, right? So for us actually there's no element of debate, it comes to that, and I think it's important from the medical, from the legal, from all of those kind of things. It has to be black and white. What goes on beyond that is up to an individual about how much, because some people don't want to know all of the metaphysical aspects of things. For them, they want to know this life has ended, this treatment is not treatable, it's conditioned. So I think, I always feel that when we bring that element into it, we make it very grey, and some people don't want it so grey, and some people do. There's a variation of that part. For me personally, as a Muslim, when I'm dead, I know that my organ has got potential to save somebody's life. For me, that's enough. Enough for me, Islamically, physically, ethically. So there are people like that as well. So I think the thing is that individuals can then go to take it further, but I think the terms have got to stay very clear what it is. That's what's the help. Our job is to be absolutely clear cut. Sheikh Abdul is obviously getting a lot more difficult questions and face a lot of these things, because there are individuals here that want to know the intricacies beyond that because they want to satisfy it and things like that. But I think they're two very separate things.
Good question. From a medical perspective, to clearly say that brain death is death.
Yeah.
What's the chances that in 20, 30, 50 years from now, we'll turn around and say brain death wasn't there? This is the parameter that we should have looked at, because we can now assess that parameter to understand it better.
Yeah, but you're right. But then in 20 to 30 years, we will then talk about it differently. The point about it is that we talk about some diseases as being terminal, cancers being the big one. They're treatable. Diseases like HIV, terminal, treatable. So it's evolving all the time, but that doesn't mean that we should prepare for the fact that the information may change, because I think that causes confusion. At the end of the day, as a doctor, as a transplant surgeon, I serve a population of not just Muslims, people of faith, but people of not faith, people of various different perspectives who may not want to get into the theological aspects of things and want you to be clear. And to say, part of the problem with the fatwa that's been issued, and I have issues for the same reason, is because now there is doubt brought about brainstem death. That wasn't the purpose of it, that wasn't the intention of that, but someone else reading it will go, hang on a minute, brainstem death is death, we can turn the machine off. Now in fact it's not, we should carry on treating. So I think those terminologies have got to be clear cut. As far as I am concerned, if somebody is brainstem dead, fulfills those criteria, they're dead, they can be issued that. And I'm held accountable to treat that person in that way. I don't have any doubt in that. If things changed and we had new tests and electrophysiological ways of measuring the brain, that's not death, then I would learn, prepare, and change the terminology. That's the way life is. I don't think we can always prepare for that.
In 30 years' time, you're right, the definition might change. And there's no problem with that, because the definition is a legal definition. And I'll give you the example. The person at the moment owns a house. You pronounce him dead. He doesn't own a house anymore. In Islamic context, his inheritors own that house. And there's a famous story of somebody who said he put his candle out just before he died, and I asked him why. He says, this doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to my children. He died. There's a legal point at which possession moves from one person to another because he has died. And that legal decision is not yours because you've got out, he's dead. You don't just say, oh, he's dead. You've got criteria, which is legal criteria, which you're abiding by. And as a medical professional, you say, yeah, he's met the criteria, or whatever word you use doesn't really matter. In effect, he's dead. And if you use the word dead as opposed to life extinct, that's in my understanding, it doesn't really matter, because what you're saying is that legally he's gone from one phase to another. In 20, 30 years' time, there's going to be somebody else replacing you, doing the same process, and there's going to be somebody up here, probably that little guy who's playing with the cars in the other room, who's going to be giving his talk about actually the Quran says, لا تكونوا من يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل هم أحياء. Don't say those the martyrs are dead. Don't say that. It's the Quran. They are alive. And Allah yurzaqun, that they are still being provided for. But this isn't talking about what you're talking about. That position of what role I have is not to pronounce death or not death. My role is when somebody's going through this and his family are going through this, I need to be there for them. And I can say things like, he's not dead. His spirit has moved to another world, and you will meet again. That's not your role. Your role is to say, actually, he's dead. And now the legal position is that his possessions are no longer his possessions. They're transferred to his inheritors. And I don't see any problem with that. That's your role. And that's my role. And in 30 years' time, some other guy's going to be doing the same thing that you're doing and asking the same questions. And that little guy's probably going to be here, hopefully, perhaps either doing your job or maybe using that Quranic verse to stand there holding somebody's hand and saying, don't worry, it's going to be all right. You're going to meet again. That's what the Quran tells you. And that's why the Quran is not there as a medical textbook. And as long as you're comfortable with where you're at, I don't see any problem with that. And that's one of the things that I appreciate the most about Dr. Umar, is that he's actually facing this every single day. And if he had a problem with it, I know he'd leave. He'd pack up and say, hey, this isn't right. But he doesn't. And that's why I can trust him. Because that's really important. I was talking about the importance of trust. But, I think you're right. Sorry, I think that answer to extend.
With the questions here, with a live donor, is it permissible to negatively impact your own health if it has a potential to say you have no benefit somebody else, but can you impact yourself negatively to
Is it possible to perhaps reduce your liver function and as a result somebody else's life is yes, absolutely right. There's no principle which says that there's in fact, if anything, it's the opposite, to give benefit to somebody.
Give me a very good question. Like family myself,
I apologize, I think that was my question. And the only reason why I asked it is because I think it's also because I'm always amazed at people's perspectives, how they see something. You don't realize it's a big class question. I think the important thing is in the context of live donation is that the donor comes first always. The donor is first. So if there is a risk of harm at the moment or long-term harm that we can identify in that donor, they do not proceed as a donor. So that's protected. That's an important part. Beyond that, I did want to know from the Islamic perspective, because even the donor is not at harm long term, they're still having an operation, and someone can answer that kind of question. But I think it's very difficult to answer because it's so specific to that situation. There's very few other scenarios where somebody is at harm, but there are stories and situations where individuals will go to try and save other people and therefore come to harm, and that is Islamically, in fact, a good thing. So that's the only thing I could relate it to. I don't know if that works like that.
It does, and I think I wouldn't give a fatwa, I wouldn't give an answer, but I can give some principles about what might guide us to make those decisions. One of them is a very important hadith, prophetic statement, which actually Dr. Omar quoted, but didn't say its origin, which is la darar wa la dirar, is that you're not allowed to harm or be harmed. So that's one principle. And then there's another principle, which is the one that we're talking about, is that philanthropic and act of generosity of giving. And that is always something which is recommended in all faiths. So you have these two principles. And when they come into a practical sense, there's an example of an occasion where a number of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad had been injured in a battle. And they went to one person and they asked, would you take some water? And he says, no, my brother. And they passed it to the next person, and he says, no, my brother. And he passed it to the next person. He says, no, my brother. And by which time, the first one had died, the second one had died, because it had gone back. And this is a famous story about how the behaviour of the companions had been. And these are the people that are left there, so to speak, as our examples. So for those people that are, these principles are there, and I think I wouldn't give a strict example, a statement to say this is okay and that's not okay. I think you need to look at all of these principles and measure them up against this particular situation, and for that you will need the kind of probability, so to speak, of what might happen as a result of this operation, and then make a decision. Well, you do that anyway.
So just following on from that question, for live donors, say for example from the South Asian community, addiction, music, are they more likely to get included themselves on those with their people who tend to donate, like for example, some donated at a young age, and they're still back to spend the rest of their life and see after diabetes to be in some
Yeah, it's a really crucial question. I think what we are still grappling with, aren't we? When I was a registrar on the transplant ward, certainly the surgeons then used to reassure everybody that, by the time you've been through all the tests, if there's any risk, you won't be allowed to donate, and that's it. And donors do better than the general population was the sort of belief. Further studies have come out from Norway, which is obviously a very different ethnic group, which has cast a little bit of a note of caution, I guess. And certainly for very young donors, I think we are a little bit more cautious because they've got their whole life ahead of them. If you're 60 years old and you've got perfect kidneys and good blood pressure, then there's less unknowns about what's going to happen to you. So I think we are a little bit more cautious with younger donors, sort of people in their 20s and maybe 18, 19 years old, but everyone's probably got a view on that as well.
No, I agree with Rosie. I think it's a great question, and it has caused a lot of dilemma. There's probably two parts to that. One part of it is the fact that one of the largest studies that's come out on the outcomes of people who have donated kidney, over 10,000 people came out of the States. And just kind of the big take-home points was that the life expectancy of the donors was higher than the average population. Now that's not to say if you give a kidney you live longer, but what it meant was it was enough for people to engage in caring about their health, which in the South Asian community is on the whole not great. They come very late for medical attention, things like blood pressure, diabetes, weight gain, so on, is not very well managed. So sometimes it gives the onus to be more particular about your health, so actually you'll have better outcomes. Secondly, the other part of it is as well is that quite often a donor has an emotional attachment to the recipient. So we can only play a certain part where we can say it's safe for you to donate, but we can't dictate whether you have the right for you to be able to donate or not. So for example, if it was my child, I'd want to donate both of my kidneys, for their benefit, which I can't, right? But there's a limit to which the medical part is to say, is it safe enough for me to donate? But secondly, there's maybe an impact in my life of that person being transplanted. So there's always a risk, and we always warn that of all live donors that we don't know what comes later on, their risk factors and so on. But you have to make that decision there and then, and it's usually as a gain for the whole unit, and not just for the individual.
There's a question here that says, you mentioned that the status of a dead body is the same as one which is alive. So why are there so many issues surrounding deceased donations, whereas life donations are considered to be okay. The real reason is because there are very specific prophetic statements related to the dead body. One of them is that you should never mutilate a body. There are other statements about to protect the right of the body. So because of the cautions that's brought about as a result of discussing the dead body, you're going to get lots more differences of opinion. Whereas there aren't any of those explicit statements about live donations. And therefore, as a result, there are more issues related to one, because the legal people, so to speak, have talked about it more, whereas the other ones haven't discussed it until much later, and therefore the debate is smaller.
Just about the NHS heating opt-out system, what difference do you expect it to make? That's the first question. Secondly, is there a scenario where you can convert, is there any 100% way of making sure that there's a way before that can do in any way to stop that?
First of all, can you just repeat the question? Can't hear
Yes, about the opt-in credit. It's about is there a way to make sure if someone's agreed to give the donation to donate the organs that nobody can override it? And second, what difference do we expect it to make?
I think the way that will stop it, and if someone's decision is they want to be a donor, I think the only way we'll be able to respect the wish is for them to talk to the family and tell the next of kin and the loved ones exactly what they want, and this is it, and this is what I want. It's not going to say that they'll definitely go ahead with that, but that's the only thing we can actually do. If they then choose not to do it, then we can do. But I think that's the most important thing. And I think with the campaign and the law change, it's all about making your decision, your informed decision, and sharing that with your family. Pass it on. Not just pass on, your organs and help other people to live, but also pass on your decision. Tell everybody that this is what you want, and show everybody, you've made that decision and why you've made that conclusion. And I think that's the only way that we're going to try and do something about that. And with regards making a difference, it's happened in Wales. It happened 2015 when Wales went to the opt-out system, and initially we saw a drop. And we've already spoken this morning about the spikes in people signing off the register, which we've seen. But now Wales have proven to be, it's made a big difference. So we're hoping that will follow suit, and we're waiting for them to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I share kind of similar views, but I mean, I'm probably one of the few people that are a bit skeptical about an opt-out system anyway towards anything, because I mean, we know that it's aimed to increase the numbers fundamentally. In Wales, it took a bit of time, and it's very mixed at what we get as a response from that. But for me, fundamentally, why I think it's important is to adopt this way of thinking into our culture. Britain is in a very unique place. It's a very diverse, open society where people have taken on an identity and to share in some of the burden and responsibility of some of the challenges in society, as we do with taxation and healthcare, education, all that kind of thing. I think it's very important that it becomes part of the culture where you're aware there's a group of people who, through no fault of their own, are facing a difficult situation, and we can help and contribute. And a lot of the work we've done with younger people and children, and they've taken to it really well. It's quite often the older generations that have found it hard to take this on. So I think it's a healthy way forward where we are beginning to share some of the challenges and difficulties as an entire community. So for that reason it's good, and that change you won't see immediately. That will take a while, but I think it's a lot deeper than just the numbers. The biggest issue is that the impact is to the loved ones who are left behind. So there's no way of discounting that. So if they're absolutely opposed to it, it's quite important that is on it. And the NHS will always take a safe approach, to not upset people. But the point about it is not to get to that conflict. It's the fact that if you're thinking, okay, I've got to make a decision, then the conversation's got to happen so that actually everybody there, is towards carrying out, what that last action that person wanted. That's definitely the way forward all around.
I always say, if you're going to share it, put it in your will, that's fine. Don't do it and talk about it. And then it's got to put it in my will. There's another way of starting that conversation and doing my will, you can set out what you want.
Last question,
Can I ask the panel, how do you feel about a statement that says that medical students, nursing students, we've got a nurse associate here, social care students, it's part of the curriculum that it's actually taught. The issues that are being raised today becomes part and parcel of the professionalism, so that people understand what the principles are and issues are, and it's not seen as sort of being something that's peripheral, but actually it's part and parcel of what a modern day doctor, nurse, social worker, etc. Should be expected to know about. How does each person, because you've got a different perspective, we've got a patient here, we've got a nurse lead here, we've got a consultant cardiothoracic surgeon, a renal physician, an ethicist. What's your views on that? Should this be now part and parcel of what the modern NHS expects people that are coming into the profession to actually do? And if so, then should we put a statement out that says, today at this meeting we all believe that this is something that should be taken forward by the Royal Colleges and everybody?
I think, yeah, definitely. I think it is something, that it should be discussed, especially in the medical profession. I mean, I didn't know anything about organ donation when I was a student, never heard anything about it. And then it just so happened that I went to work in intensive care, and that's where I sort of started to show my interest in organ donation. And I think even then, as a junior staff nurse on the unit, I didn't really embrace organ donation as such. At first I was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure. But then it's looking at the bigger picture, isn't it? And not just looking narrow-mindedly at just what's in front of you. So I think definitely bringing it into the teaching and the training is really, really imperative to the future of what's going to come and making it normal. Having this new opt-out system, getting society to talk about it, making it the norm. Like in Spain, it's just a normal thing. It's no big deal. So I think definitely for me.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Very good idea. I actually didn't know anything about live donation. I thought it has to be there. But for kidney, you just need one kidney. Yes, it should be incorporated. It's a good idea.
Thank you. I would actually say it's not a healthcare issue. I don't think it's the curriculums for medical training or nursing training. I think it's the curriculums for school. We've brought many other things in about gender equality, and various different things that we've brought into teaching children. Children are very receptive. They take it as what it is, and they're actually going back to have the conversations with their parents and getting them talking about it. I think it's a part of British society as a whole, and organ donation can be used as a model for us to talk about a lot of other diseases and awareness, things within society. So I think even earlier, we build it into the culture very early on. It doesn't need to be something that just belongs to the domain of healthcare professionals having to go, because there's actually something that a lot of people form quite a strong opinion in with no medical knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. I think it needs to be, to achieve a culture change in society, it needs to start very early on, just to normalise the whole thing, that there will be people who need an organ, and the best thing is that they have that. And yes, okay, dialysis does exist, but the organ transplant is the norm. I can reassure you, it's in the GCSE biology curriculum now, and they love it. The messages are not necessarily quite what I would like to be in there, but it is in there. But yeah, I think it also needs to be in the curriculum for medical students, nursing students, because just to reinforce and obviously go a bit deeper with the knowledge. Particularly about the kidney sharing scheme as well, which time did not allow us to focus on today, but just, you know, that if you have a relative or a friend who wants to donate but isn't compatible, they donate into the kidney sharing scheme. That can set about a chain of transplants, maybe up to 20, 30, 40 people may have a transplant as a result of that one kidney coming into the pool, which is a domino effect, which is, you know, not a lot of people know about that at the moment. We just need to normalise the whole thing in society.
Yeah, I agree. The more people talk about it, the stuff.
I definitely agree. But I would split it into two different areas, and one would be education about organ donation, ethics, you know, more medical ethics. And I'm actually a specialist philosophy teacher for the Philosophy Foundation, and we do a lot of teaching philosophy in schools with 8-year-olds up to GCSE students. And a lot of it is about bringing ethical dilemmas into the classroom so that young people can start to think very early on about how to deliberate with difficult situations and think about their values and beliefs. But the other side of it would link back to what I spoke about this afternoon around cultural and faith literacy, and I think that does need to be part of the curriculum for healthcare professionals, primarily because we have a changing demographic in this country, and if healthcare professionals are going to serve the needs of patients, their knowledge should reflect what some of the challenges that population may face. And actually I think there was a speech in the House of Lords in 2017 that talked about the need for social and cultural faith, cultural competency amongst healthcare professionals. So unless we incorporate that into the education curriculum at the university level or even sooner, it might be difficult to get there. So yeah.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I think we're going to bring to an end there. Just one quick announcement. Kidney Research UK have offered peer educator training, which might be in the summer. I think we'll email something. It'll be accredited training, and be free of charge. We'll email something around to gauge interest and perhaps give feedback, and then maybe they might do something in June or something like that. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming and being patient with us and staying in, and especially I'd like to give a warm hand of applause if we can. Really interesting talk again, and fascinating discussions every time. It was the third event. It's so new for me every time, so it really was useful. I'd thank everyone for that help set up, the sponsors, ASICM, all this work here, and lots of the family members, and Dr. Zane's been really helpful as well. So everyone knows who's helped out. If I miss any name, I do apologise, but everyone's been really helpful. We'll be running another event later in the year, perhaps a smaller scale, maybe a different format. But anyway, we'll be in touch. Evaluation forms on the desk, please fill them in, and the certificates are here on this front desk and this front table. I think everyone had a safe journey home. Thank you very much.